From the darkest reaches of space to the deepest corners of your mind. Welcome to From the Void.
Last time we began to dive into the chilling case of Fox Hollow Farm and its alleged killer, Herb Baumeister. We explored the horrifying crimes tied to this property, the theories that still swirl around it, and the brand new docuseries The Fox Hollow Murders, Playground of a Serial Killer, now streaming on Hulu, which is shedding new light on the case. But there's still more to uncover. In part 2 of my conversation with filmmaker Alex Jablonski, we're diving deeper into the evidence that has emerged, disturbing details that suggest we may not know the full extent of what happened at Fox Hollow. Could there be more victims? Did Baumeister act alone? And what strange, unexplained phenomena still haunt the property to this day? We're peeling back the layers of one of the Midwest's most terrifying mysteries. Stay with us. This is From the Void.
Having walked those woods, having been out there, it strikes me as nearly impossible to do the work that he did and to commit the crimes that he did all by himself.
Yeah, talk a little bit about, like, we're talking about the victims. Like, how many victims have they been able to confirm? Because I heard the quote in your documentary series that the only site that has more bone fragments present is the site where the Twin Towers were 9/11, which is just mind-boggling to think about. And so obviously there's tons of bone fragments. It's a tall order for them to, they brought in a whole department to try to like piece all this together. And there's still a lot of families out there who think that they may have family members who were victims that they can't confirm yet. So how many have they confirmed? And then how, like, presumably there's probably still more bones out there to be found.
Yes. And I think that it's important when people hear the figure of 10,000 bone and bone fragments, I think they immediately go, well, there are 200 and, whatever it is, 56 bones in the human body. But you have to remember, some of the bone fragments are about the size of your thumbnail. So it's bones that flaked off as they were burning. But then at the same time, they also found fully intact femurs and, large bones, vertebrae. So my understanding is that the rough estimate is probably like 17 or 18, but that's just looking at the bones and just kind of making a guesstimate. The way that they actually did it at the time was looking at a bone that everyone has in their left wrist and how many of those they found. And I think that they believe that they have 11 individuals that they've identified, and then 2 or 3 more that they believe they have the DNA samples from, but they haven't matched to anyone else. And this is continuing to unfold. Jeff Jellison has announced that he has made a new identification of a new victim just in the last week. So this story will continue to unfold, and the number and names of the victims will continue to change.
Now, I know he's been kind of the central figure in trying to reignite some investigation around this case. Since the documentary series has released, what sense do you have that the police department, is willing to reopen and kind of look into some of these characters who may or may not have been involved?
Honestly, zero interest. I thought for sure that this was going to come out and I was going to get an email or a call from the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office saying, we want the Goodyear tapes, or some kind of subpoena. And just so folks know, like, I have been subpoenaed by the FBI on a previous project because we had video that related to a crime, and that's totally something that happens. So I thought they're going to want to talk to us. I also thought that they would come out and make an announcement saying, hey, we are aware of the new attention being put on this case because in Indianapolis, all the local television stations are reporting on this, all that. Nothing. There seems to be no interest in reopening the case that I'm aware of thus far.
That's remarkable. I mean, you'd think that at the very least, they could see that, hey, there are some rocks that we left unturned in the original investigation. And at the very least, for the benefit of the families and the people who are still looking for family members whose remains have not been identified, they would at least put forth some effort and some time into this case. But sounds like not so far.
No. And my understanding is that people are coming forward with new evidence as well.
Wild. Do you have any intentions on, if there's enough new evidence that kind of emerges and doing some follow-up episodes as well?
Yeah, I can tell you right now, we have enough material to do another 8 episodes, but
do it.
It is really up to the powers that be. I think that, yes, I'm very interested in doing a second season. I'm not being coy about that at all. there's a lot that we were unable to get into on the series because of time constraints. And for example, there's a lot of thinking that Baumeister was what was called the I-70 Strangler, which was a series of murders that happened in the 80s along I-70, which, for folks who don't know, connects Indianapolis to Columbus, Ohio, and goes through Dayton. And there were gay men who were found, similar MO in the sense that they were strangled. It seemed as though there had been sexual activity with these men, and they were dumped by the side of the road. And we know that Baumeister was traveling this I-70. And so there was a lot of thinking like, oh, Baumeister, and those killings seemed to stop when Baumeister bought Fox Hollow. The theory is he didn't have a place to dispose of the bodies. He buys a house where he can dispose of the bodies. He starts disposing of them there, and he's no longer dropping them on, roadside culverts. We didn't get into that in this series, in part because from a journalistic standards perspective, it's very hard to say, yeah, this guy, this is the person who did it, when you don't have anyone on camera, no law enforcement on camera who's willing to say that. And there's literally no physical evidence that ties him to those murders. It's all just kind of conjecture and a theory. And actually, when you start digging into the police files, there's some stuff that doesn't quite match up with that. So, for example, there was one victim who was considered a victim of the I-70 Stranglers. He was last seen with 3 bikers, like motorcycle bikers. And it's like, well, that is not Baumeister. But that's a thread that we would love to pull at. And in addition to that, even since the show's come out, we've gotten new information where we would love to pursue it. So it's hopefully going to happen, but it's up to kind of the larger forces in the corporate hierarchy of the media landscape.
Oh, well, I think that would be exceptional. And just for perspective, I think I mentioned when I reached out, I've got 2 brothers who live in Indianapolis who are not far from Fox Hollow. I myself live in Columbus. So so the I-70 corridor is very familiar. We've traveled that route many, many times, and that's definitely a story that we grew up hearing about. And so that would be very interesting to dig into that. So, to go back a little bit, I think it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about Herb himself. And oftentimes, in retrospect, we look at serial killers and there are some red flags. There's some indicators in their past. Tell folks a little bit about Herb Baumeister. We know from serial killers now, based off of new research, that oftentimes there was some animal cruelty in their history, or the parenting wasn't the greatest. There's usually clues somewhere in there. Were there any of those signs with Herb?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's a story that his classmates from high school told. He left a dead crow on his teacher's desk. He was working for the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, and there's a story that he did a similar thing of leaving a dead animal on his supervisor's desk. And then there's this kind of famous story that he got reprimanded, and he took the letter the written up reprimand, put it on his supervisor's desk, stood up on his supervisor's desk, and peed on the letter. And this is in front of other people. This is what got him fired, actually. His father was a powerful doctor in the community. I believe he was an anesthesiologist. And his dad hooked him up with a job. I believe it was at a newspaper. And there was this story that there was supposed to be some kind of business outing with his boss and his boss's associates. And Herb said, I'll drive. Don't worry about it. I'll drive. I've got a car big enough that can fit everybody. And he said, let's meet here at such and such time. And he pulls up in a hearse. And everyone goes, what? We're not getting in a hearse? What are you talking about? And he kind of couldn't even see what was wrong with that. He was like, what are you talking about? And his dad was embarrassed and all that. But so, yeah, he had a pattern of displaying behavior that was totally bizarre, but he himself was not aware enough to see that it was bizarre. And then, of course, you have these elements of the animals and kind of inappropriate behavior throughout his life.
Yeah, that's just definitely strange. So one of the things I'm kind of curious about is, obviously, the unfortunate thing is Herb, and you can talk about that a little bit too. Herb was never actually arrested for this crime. And so talk a little bit about, so they start to find the evidence on his property, and yet, conventional wisdom would say that clearly we would at least bring this guy in while we're collecting all this evidence to have a conversation with him, and that never happened.
No, it's even wilder than that, because Herb knew the police were at his property. He was with his son, who was 15 at the time, and he and his son went to their lake house. And he and his wife were in the midst of a divorce. She became concerned about the safety of her son, had asked the police. She got a court order for temporary custody of their son and sent the police to the lake house to get their son. So the cops go up there. This is while they are, the split screen is the cops are knocking on his door at the lake house. On the other side of the screen, they're literally pulling up femurs from his backyard. And the cops say to the son, Eric, come with us. And they let her go. And now I think that, and I didn't know this until I spoke to other, kind of career homicide detectives who said, it is policing 101 that when you have a suspect and you are writing the arrest warrant, you have that suspect surveilled. Meaning, and typically it's the drug guys that do this. But even if you have somebody one county over, you call them up and you say, hey, and look, we think that this guy he's our lead suspect in these homicides. And you send somebody out and just sit on him for 24, 48, 72 hours. And while the cops are surveilling that guy, you're working with the DA to write the arrest warrant. And the DA is saying, no, that's not good enough. I'm not going to sign that. No, okay, maybe, what else? And of course, in those early hours of an investigation, more and more evidence is coming in, right? So in this case, it would be like, well, we found this, and we found this, and we found this. Okay. They never surveilled her. They didn't even have a car parked outside of the lake house, which is all it would have taken, is one police cruiser sitting outside the lake house to know where he was going to be. And that is one of the pieces of this case that, viewers seem to struggle to understand. And I'm right there with them. I do not understand how that happened.
Have you ever felt like something isn't quite right in your home? Footsteps when no one's there? Cold spots? Whispers in the dark? We've launched FTV Paranormal Investigations, and we want to hear from you. Whether it's your house, a historic building, or a property that you own, if you think something unexplained is going on, we'll come investigate. Just head to our website, www.fromthevoidpod.com, and click on the FTV Paranormal Investigations tab. Fill out the contact form with all the details, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. And here's the best part. If we catch anything compelling, your case could end up featured on an upcoming episode of From the Void. So if you think you're not alone, maybe you're right. Now, back to the show. Yeah, on one hand, it seems as if there's enough evidence to grant this protection order for the child, and yet not enough to even bring him in for questioning, which is just confounding. You're like, what in the world? So it kind of leads me back to what you mentioned earlier, which is that this is a police department that is not dealing with murders on a regular basis at this point, and this is not like a much larger city where this is a daily thing, and they've got tenured, seasoned detectives, and so it almost feels as if there were some mistakes made by a department that's just not used to dealing with this sort of thing.
Yes. At the same time, I think that there's so many questions, which is any one of these police departments, my understanding is you could call the FBI and you could say, hey, we got this. We think some of these victims are from out of state, which they might have been. We've got a ton of remains. We're in over our heads. Lend us a hand. At the same time, the missing persons cases were being handled by IPD, by the Indianapolis Police Department. Okay, Indianapolis is a big city. So at any time, the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office could have gone to IPD and said, hey, these are your missing persons. Can you lend us some homicide detectives? Can you lend us? We need a hand on this. We don't know if these guys were abducted. If they were abducted, then of course, the abduction would have been the jurisdiction of IPD. Yes, I think that it is a small department. They were not prepared to deal with a case of this magnitude. At the same time, did they avail themselves of the resources that were available to them? No. Do I think the IPD or the FBI would have helped out if they'd been asked? Yes.
So I'm assuming, I'm sure that, as you're trying to gather up witnesses and people who, could contribute to the documentary series, I'm sure there were attempts to try to get in touch with some of the family members. Because obviously, I don't know if the wife is still alive, but I would presume that the kids are as well. Did any of them even consider, contributing?
Yes, we were in touch with his wife. We were in touch with one of his children, and there was conversations about contributing, and ultimately they decided not to. And I think that's kind of all I can say about that.
Fair enough. Yeah, that would be, I would imagine, psychologically speaking, just a really difficult thing to go public with. But it would be interesting to know, obviously, from their perspective, what they were seeing on a day in and day out basis. Hopefully, some point down the future, if there is a season 2, maybe they'll reconsider. Who knows?
Yeah, that would be my hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Talk a little bit about, just kind of your hopes for this series, because obviously this is something, as you said, that's sort of you've seemingly opened up a can of worms here, and hopefully a good way in terms of like getting some semblance of justice for the folks who are still sitting out there wondering where their loved ones ended up and if they were in fact victims. And so what is your hope for this series as it kind of continues to grow and gain traction?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing that we haven't really touched on that is really central to the series is that we tell the stories of the victims. And I think that we center the victims in a way that I don't think a lot of true crime stories do, which is that you see the mother of one of the young men who disappeared talk about kind of how much she missed him, how sad it was, how she would wait by the phone, just waiting for him to call. And we interview someone who had never spoken about this case, the son of one of the victims, who tells the story of what it was like to have his dad just essentially vanish. And I think that one of the things that my hope for the series is that these victims are really seen for the humans that they are, because oftentimes true crime, it's so salacious that you're not talking about the victims, but there's a real human toll to this. And I think that it's really important to highlight that. And I think that, we're all we understand that these were a marginalized group, because these were young gay men, some of whom were sex workers, so a marginalized group within a marginalized group. And that the police really, I think, did not work this as hard as they would have because of that. And I think it's one thing to kind of view this trapped in amber and go, oh, that's such a horrible thing. I'm so glad we're past that. But we're not, because I think the same thing that it happened with these young men is happening with trans folks now. And so I do hope that people are able to see like, hey, this is still going on. And we have to kind of, fight for the justice for all of us in that sense. And, this is what happened when we didn't in the 90s. And now what is it that you can do? Where can you push on for more justice today? So that's one piece of it. Another piece of it is that, I hope that we continue to get more answers. I don't think that this is done. I think that there are more victims. I know, having spoken to Jeff Giles yesterday or earlier this week, I know that there are more victims' names that we're going to find out. With every victim, that leads us to understand, like, where were they? Who were they hanging out with? I think that there's a lot more to this case. And so I think that my hope is that we continue to unravel it. I also hope that people understand that, like, the story of this case is that if you don't deal with things in the past, they haunt the present. And that's true in all of our lives, and it's true in kind of the criminal justice system as well. And so it's like, it's kind of a cautionary tale and how important it is to get things right the first time and deal with things and get justice the first time, not 30 years on.
Yeah, it's like I said, you did such a remarkable job. It's a wonderful documentary series, just in the sense that it does highlight the victims and it doesn't diminish their part in all of this. And it did wreak havoc on a number of families who still don't have answers. It's not as cut and dry as some historic serial killer cases where, again, we captured the guy, we got the guy who did it, and we know who the victims were. And this one, like, Herb, commit suicide in Canada, which I don't think we covered. And so before they even get a chance to question him and potentially get more answers and more information about what happened, the guy who knows everything, in effect, is gone. And so that resource is not available to us anymore. And so it just feels like there's still a lot of people out there who are suffering and grieving, but in a sense that they don't have like even a chance at closure until we dig a little deeper into this. And it feels like we owe a lot of people at least an effort to try to find the truth in this complex and kind of twisted story.
Absolutely. Completely agree.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's a fascinating story, heartbreaking, and has twists and turns in a way that I've not seen in a lot of other true crime stories. And it, again, hits close to home because I've got family over in Indiana, very close by, and it's not that far away, and there's still a lot to learn about this case. So I hope you get a season 2, and I hope we continue to find out more and we get some justice for the victims. And thank you so much for coming on again.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Fox Hollow Farm has always been a place of unanswered questions, a place where the past refuses to rest. Herb Baumeister is gone, but the mysteries surrounding him remain. How many victims were there really? Did he act alone? And what secrets are still buried beneath the soil of that property? Thanks to Fox Hollow Murders, Playground of a Serial Killer, now streaming on Hulu, we're closer than ever to understanding the full scope of this case. But one thing is certain. Places like Fox Hollow don't just hold ghosts. They hold the weight of the truth that's yet to be uncovered. A huge thank you to Alex Jablonski for joining me and sharing the harrowing process of bringing this story to life. If you haven't watched the docuseries yet, I highly recommend checking it out. It's a chilling, eye-opening deep dive into one of America's most disturbing unsolved mysteries. And if you enjoy stepping into the unknown with me each week, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to From the Void on your favorite podcast platform. Share this episode with friends who love true crime and mysteries. You never know who else might be drawn into the void. I'll be back next week with another mystery. Until then, stay curious, stay cautious, and as always, watch where you step.